February 22nd. This is a meeting of the Senate Agricultural Committee. And this morning on our schedule, as you noted, we'll be working on the agricultural agencies' changes to their laws. And I think it's important to try to get that bill out this week so that it would give any other committee that may have to look at that, ample time. So as soon as Michael gets here, we'll start running through that section by section. And the only thing I asked Michael to do with that was to add on a section that would allow the dairy task force to continue for an additional year. And that I think it'll all blend together. And I think I mentioned that to you folks last week, and I didn't hear any objections from doing that. We did as far as the task force goes, we did have a professor, a law professor, go through the constitutional aspects of doing an in-state dairy pricing program. And we got some of that response back this past, well, must have been Thursday or Friday. And that all looked good from his point of view. The only thing that he hadn't gotten squared away was what happens when milk comes in from like New York State that we've heard comes in, and it's made into a product here in Vermont. Whether or not those farmers would get part of the proceeds if we did do an in-state order on manufactured goods. So I think he's going to spend a little more time on figuring that out. In some cases, it's reblended within the co-op to include those guys, and sometimes it isn't. And so anyways, well, maybe Michael will give us an overview on that. So I didn't know, are there any questions from any of you guys in regards to, the task force stuff or any of that? Or the Ag Committee suggestions?
I haven't focused enough, so I'll look forward to seeing the language just to understand the little bits, but I'm kind of assuming it's all pretty innocuous, right?
Well, the only issue I've got with, I think the part that we're doing is giving them authority to withhold money if a farmer is not in total compliance with all the rules and regs. And it's sort of, I look at that as sort of a blackmail type issue. That may be in dispute with them in regards to a fine or a penalty that's been offered, or it's been directed from the agency to the farmer, and they're in dispute over that. I think that ought to be a question that we flush out a little bit. it makes a difference if you're in a serious, I think, a serious problem like with water quality or some environmental issue. I can understand that, but if it's just in with a minor dispute over whether your slaughterhouse is in a certain way or a certain position and they don't agree with it, or, if it's a minor issue, I think the agency ought to be more lenient sometimes and more understanding. And if they've got this penalty or basically withholding funds from them because they applied for and won working lands grants or any USDA money or state money. If it's a minor infraction and they're arguing over that, I don't think, but I don't know if there's a way to deal with that or not. But
Didn't I thought the agency testified that this description of a more minor, squabble, it was actually helpful because the motivation to get in on these grants, which is what we're talking about, was good and helpful to settle up these little minor, administrative whatever, so that they could clear them out. So it's interesting. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but it's a bit counterintuitive. But if I think of the bureaucracy as having, 36 of those things just looming all the time, and not a lot of motivation to clear them up from landowners because they're pesky and they're $1,200. It's not a huge deal, and then this becomes a motivation to settle that out. I don't know. I thought that's what I heard, but I also thought that this was basically codifying standard practice anyway, but making it just blanket, and that the state's general rules around granting kind of included good standing language.
Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think actually, Chris, the only thing that's in effect now are water quality good standing issues. This would extend the authority, but I will say, reading the bill, it does say that the agency may waive the grant prohibition if the secretary determines that the applicant is working, hard to get back into good standing, and that all the issues are minor and don't warrant ineligibility. The secretary determines that waiving the good standing requirement is in the interest of justice. So I think the chair's point is well taken. I would just like to hear a little bit more about how often this is happening, how many farmers are involved, why they feel the need to increase the scope a little bit more. That's all.
Anthony, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing that Brian just said, though. When you look at the bill, the way it's drafted, it gives you a bunch of possible outs, and they can waive the prohibition on the grant. So it's basically what Brian pointed out.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, maybe some of you others can, when people put their farm stands too close to the road, or they were having trouble with their little farm stands, and I could just see them say a veggie grower was in their farm stand too close to the road, and they come along and hit them up with a fine or threatening them to fine them and stuff. And if this was in place, they could say, well, you've had 2 years to move your farm stand and it's still sitting there. If you're not in good standing, we're gonna withhold your grant. I've never heard of a farmer other than one of my big guys up north here that was in a bad way with water quality stuff, and they wouldn't give them their federal grant because they hadn't complied, and it did bring them into compliance. But I also heard from a guy that was setting up a small slaughter facility and meat packing thing, and had really not any, hadn't had any trouble, but the wife sent in a notice that they were ready for inspection. And the guy, the husband, said, golly, why'd you send that in? I told them that we weren't going to be ready for 2 more weeks. And it was a mistake that they made amongst themselves. But then when they came, they had a big hoodoo over that inspection time. And I mean, it was nasty. And then they wouldn't give the guy his license. I mean, he fooled around all summer over getting, because then they had found all kinds of things that weren't just quite right. And but anyways, we'll see how that language is, and maybe we can tweak it a little bit to help those minor infractions. Morning, Michael.
Good morning. Sorry I'm
Um,
late. I'm in the building and, you get caught in the hallway.
That's one thing about Zoom, you don't get caught in the hallway unless it's with one of the children or a wife. Yeah, I certainly understand that getting caught.
Mhm.
So anyways, we're planning on going through the ag agency's draft. The issues that we had from the ag agency that we were gonna deal with. And I think you put that in draft form.
Yes, but I did just send it to Linda. My apologies. So I don't know if it's up on your committee website yet. I don't see it.
Is that something you could share on your screen as you're going through it, or?
Yeah, I could. I might
Michael,
need
is
a-
that the same draft? Is that the original draft?
No, it is not. I just sent you a new draft. It's should say S258.
Okay, I'll put it on.
All right, I might be able to open it up. Actually, no, it's still scanning.
Mine is too, still scanning.
I can talk about it in general until the scans finish. I don't know if you know, but now that we're sending things through email, the whole system scans every email before it can be opened. And
Yeah.
it takes time.
And it
So-
never marks my emails as read, which is my only system for knowing that I've dealt with it. Oh, so maddening.
Well, some of the stuff probably hasn't been changed from the last time we went through it, right, Michael?
Right.
So when you get the one, I think we could pull that up.
Sure, I could pull up what's on the it's on the committee's website right now.
Yeah, I've got draft 1.1.
Right, that's just basic language, though. It wasn't. You had asked that it be, the language be incorporated into S-258, which was Senator Pearson and Senator Polino's required agricultural practices bill.
Yep.
And so that is what we're trying to open up right now.
But Michael, in terms of the actual language, that's just the lead in and striking out and stuff, right?
That is correct. That the provisions in 258 are no longer in the revised version. What is being added are the provisions requested by the Agency of Agriculture. Almost all of them relate to water quality. And they are almost exactly the same as what is listed on the committee's website.
Okay. So,
I mean, I'm sorry about this. It's just, I should have sent this earlier, and now
I guess what I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, is why don't we just work off the draft language?
Yeah, what we had, we could do that. And if there is a change, Michael, you could, when you get to that section, if we've had to make changes, just note that and we'll go back to it when you get that pulled up. Would that work?
Sure. I can go to the committee's website and pull up what's on the committee's website right now. All right. Let me do that.
Linda, I don't know if Steve Collier's on or not, but he might want to be if he isn't.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll send Steve Collier an invitation.
So the
Yeah.
the first section is the good standing language requested by the agency. This would go into the agency's general authority, 6 VSA Chapter 1, and it would apply to an applicant's compliance history with the agency for any program administered by the agency. So you'll see that it's good standing means an applicant for a grant exclusively awarded by the agency does not have an active enforcement violation that's reached a final order with the secretary and is in compliance with all terms of current grant agreement or contract with the agency. So that is anything that the agency administers.
Is there any difference in that between a minor infraction versus a major infraction in compliance?
It really depends on what's going to reach a final order. The agency generally doesn't pursue a final order until the person subject to the enforcement has not been complying. So it for a while. So it's not necessarily major versus minor. It's a person that is just not complying with the agency's enforcement.
But what if there's a dispute between the applicant and the agency over some minor issue?
Well, that could go to a final order. That's potentially something that could go to a final order.
What can you walk us? I'm sorry to jump in, Mr. Chair. I want to build on your question.
No, that's fine.
Can you walk us through sort of the what you understand, Michael, as the process? So these are usually issues that arise after an inspection or some kind of annual or whatever kind of visit, right?
Yep. So the agency has general powers of enforcement in 6 VSA Chapter 1. And then they have more specific powers of investigation and enforcement under the multiple chapters of law that they implement. Just looking at the general authorities under 6 VSA Chapter 1, what they do is they can do an investigation, an inspection, etc., or they can note that someone is operating without having applied for a permit or having applied for renewal. What they then do is they normally issue some sort of letter informing them of their need to comply. If that is not, and a date by which they need to comply by. If they don't comply by that date, then they can issue what's called an assurance of discontinuance to basically a judicial proceeding. And at the end of that judicial proceeding, the court can issue a final order. And that final order determines whether or not the person subject to enforcement has to pay or is innocent, etc. And then that's when the final order criteria will be built into the good standing for agency grants.
So in that process, when somebody gets a letter alerting them to an issue, are they at that point out of compliance? That's what I'm trying to understand is sort of when have you triggered the problem zone in terms of this language?
Not until you've received the letter, ignored the letter, failed to come into terms of compliance according to the letter, got an assurance of discontinuance and still failed to comply, went to court, still failed to comply, and then were subject to a final court order.
So this is not going to capture somebody that just didn't notice a letter or a phone call or something. You're only kicked out of this opportunity when you're pretty far into it, into the bureaucratic process. Is
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And honestly, in the past, some people who have been reluctant to comply, they settle on the courthouse steps.
Right.
Right.
It's like a New England movie.
Yeah. They're just like, all right, you've got me. I'm going to comply now. And then they agree to comply.
And they sign a paper, write a little check, and they're done.
Yeah.
They usually aren't little checks, so are they, Michael?
The administrative penalties for individual violations is $1,000, but it can go up to $25,000 for continuing violations, which if you're going to have a reluctant complier.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
S258 is now on the web page if you want to switch over to it.
I can do that.
Since we're still on the first section. And I had a question, Michael, do the current provisions apply only to water quality issues?
The current good standing provisions are only in chapter 215, which is water quality. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the
So this-
RAPs, medium farm, large farm, small farm certification.
So this
Or
would open it
spreading.
up. This would open it up to all of what ag is.
All agency programs. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And another question, Michael, how many other state agencies have some authority like what we're talking about? Do you have any idea?
Well, I generally only have familiarity with the Agency of Ag and the Agency of Natural Resources, and I know the Agency of Natural Resources has similar authority. It's compliance history authority, and frankly, under federal law, the feds don't like to fund somebody that's in violation of the law. So NRCS has a similar provision. If you're not in compliance with the law, you may not be eligible under NRCS. EPA programs have similar provisions. You have to be in compliance.
Well, I certainly understand that whole part of it, that if it's something dealing with our waters or our environment, those are usually pretty serious problems. It's the minor issues that I'm concerned about. Somebody having a $500 fine, but they haven't got 50 cents in their pocket, and they finally applied for some grant to do something on their their veggie farm or slaughter facility, and they but they don't have any money to pay it with, and then they get a grant thinking that they're gonna be able to pay it, and then they're told, well, you can't get the grant until you come into compliance, and it's just an easy way out for the agency, or they're not really the agency, it's certain inspectors to flex their muscle on people that they shouldn't really be maybe harassing. But anyways,
Mr.
go
Chair,
ahead, Chris.
I'm intrigued by your position here because I'm not eager for anyone in Vermont to feel harassed by state bureaucracy, and it's not hard to imagine that feeling. But these are grants. These are people that are applying to get taxpayer dollars to help with their business at some level. And so I guess I'm curious. I mean, it's voluntary. Nobody has to apply for these. And wouldn't that tip the scale in favor of getting recipients into compliance?
Well, I would hope that it would, by not having an easy out at the agency, that the superiors at the agency would maybe have some conversations with their people that work out in the field, so that they aren't strong-arming anybody into anything. They should be there to help people, not to strong-arm them into becoming into compliance with an argument over who determines whether they're in or out. It's all in the eyes of the beholder in many cases. And so that's the only thing. But we don't want to spend all morning on this section. We got, but yeah, what might be good is just hold this one and move on, and we'll see what Collier has to say about it. And we can always, even if we took it out of our proposal, we could put it into the House proposal when that comes over, because they're sending us over a bunch of updates that the agency wants. They just send a little message for a bit.
Well, maybe if I could just ask Michael one question, and I see Steve has also joined us. So nothing in this language changes that regulatory process of, notification of being out of compliance, potential fines if you don't react. Right. I mean, all of that exists with or without this language.
Correct. That is not changing. And the specific enforcement authority in the multiple chapters that the agency administers is not changing either. They retain all their enforcement authority.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So
Should I move on?
Yeah,
So section 2, this is the language where the agency was seeking some ability to have regulatory authority over waste that was imported onto a farm. Remember in your discussions last year, food residuals and other things that might be brought onto the farm, either for composting or for addition to the manure pit. The agency doesn't have specific authority to regulate what's imported on. And so they want this changed so that they can have that authority.
Mr. Chair,
yes,
Michael, we've been talking about this, the DPAC compost, and some of that, I think actually most of it is sent to the digester, but I want to make clear, I guess I want to understand the actual implications here, and because it's sort of a live, this language seems really innocent and straightforward, and obviously we need to include imports onto farms, but what is, I guess I'm curious, what is the actual ramifications in terms of some of those bigger scale processes in turn? We've talked about the wastewater treatment sludge. We've talked a little bit about the DPACs. I'd like to understand what this innocent sounding language might actually do for our farms and the intersection of the two agencies. Do you have any ability to help me understand that?
Sure. So last year in the compost and chickens bill, you gave the authority to the agency to set up a program to regulate basically agricultural waste on farms. I'm trying to call up that bill. And so they will be setting up a program. They will have rules. And so that is partly what is going on here. It's what activity under that program what activities under that program are they going to have authority over? And so they would like to have authority over this type of waste, and it's waste that's coming onto a farm. Now, if it's material from a depackaging facility, if it's material from a sludge facility, it's very possible that it's not going to be characterized as waste, that it's going to be characterized as an agricultural input. But it could be characterized as waste. It could be characterized by the agency as something that they have some regulatory authority over, and that they could address in the rulemaking that you gave them authority to adopt last year. Whether or not it affects the land application of municipal sewage sludge, well, that's actually a A&R program under the solid waste management rules. That is not an agency of agriculture program. Similarly, some of the materials from food to packaging is not going to be an agency of agriculture program. It'll be regulated by A&R. Some of the material that's going to be brought onto a farm from food to packaging could fall under the agency's food residuals and agricultural residuals authority that you gave them last year. And so that will be part of the regulatory process for those materials. You should know that H501 in the House Natural is planning to vote on that bill today. It would establish a moratorium on the permitting of new depackaging facilities or new depackaging equipment at existing solid waste facilities until A&R reports on food to packaging and then adopts a rule establishing standards for food to packaging, including contamination in food to packaging materials. So that's likely going to pass the committee today or tomorrow, and will likely be something that the committee, the Senate sees after crossover.
But that doesn't mean that it'll go to Bray's committee, I would presume. But a moratorium, I mean, that's pretty heavy, I would think, for a business. You take that guy we had in last week that up in South Burlington that takes a lot of food scrap stuff.
So the moratorium is only on new. It's only on new facilities and new equipment. Those facilities that are already certified get to continue operation.
We'll give him
Yeah,
a little
but-
monopoly while we figure it out.
Well, what if a machine goes to heck and he has to have a new machine? I mean, he's out of business.
That's built into the language as well.
Oh, it is replacement.
It's basically certification or amendment to your solid waste calls their permit certification. So if you need an amended certification for equipment, that can be allowed, provided that it doesn't increase the material that's produced at the facility.
So-
Chris?
Well, so Michael, I guess I'm not seeing how, under this language in section 2, how A&R holds on to power. This is just saying if A&R has deemed it to be harmful to the waters of the state, including blah, 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 but it's going imported onto a farm, then ag has jurisdiction, right?
Yes and no. So remember that this whole issue arose because A&R said we're no longer going to regulate the certain waste that it's brought onto a farm that's then added to a manure pit, etc. And so the Agency of Ag wanted to know about those materials, and that's where you originally had a reporting requirement. And then the reporting requirement kind of changed into the agricultural residuals program that you gave the Agency of Ag authority over last year for the management of residual waste generated, imported to, or managed on a farm. So you already gave them authority to regulate imports, but you didn't change the definition of waste to include imports. Now, with regard to food to packaging, municipal septic systems, etc., those are all regulated by A&R under the solid waste rules. When, say, municipal sludge is going to be land applied, that land application needs a solid waste permit, and it needs to be land applied according to a nutrient management plan. And if it's a farm, the farm needs to be included underneath the solid waste management permit. So in my opinion, that's still an A&R program, albeit the Agency of Ag regulates nutrient management plans on a farm and can provide conditions for a nutrient management plan because they want the nutrient management plan to be applied appropriately. You're going to have the same.
Go ahead.
You're going to have the same A&R type of authority over food to packaging material, provided that for some of these materials, A&R is basically giving up their authority, and then it becomes the Agency of Agriculture's authority.
So you're not seeing this change the oversight. It's more of a clarification around definitions to catch up with the way the two agencies are dealing with it now.
Right. And will there be growing pains? Will they bump elbows on who's going to assert jurisdiction over what? Yes. They need to work out how the two programs are going to work together. So there's going to be some growing pains for these programs.
Okay, thank you.
But it does cover both agencies, so they should work together anyways, you know. It's crazy, some of the argument. How did waste oil get mixed in with all these other items where they don't seem to have anything in common? Do you know anything about that, Michael?
Well, the term waste or agricultural waste is used throughout Chapter 215, which is where this definition is being added. So it has multiple uses. So you can't discharge agricultural waste, so you can't discharge waste oil. But at the same time, there's a provision that allows for the land application of agricultural waste according to a nutrient management plan. So it's a term that's used in multiple ways in Chapter 215, and that's why all these different terms are incorporated into the definition.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there more to section 2?
No, that's it. The next section is really just it's about manure pits and how the agency is to respond to an alleged violation of a leak that affects groundwater. Currently, if there's a threat to human health or the environment from a waste storage facility, a manure pit, it has to be based on a violation of state groundwater protection standards. So the agency is providing to strike that condition. So if there's any threat to human health or the environment from the waste storage facility, maybe to surface water, then the agency has the ability to respond and require that facility owner to modify the facility to meet the NRCS standard.
Yep.
In
Now,
addition,
does that include pits that were previously designed by NRCS and the federal agencies, and then they've gone to leaking?
yes, it does. It in section 4815 subsection A, Senator Starr, you were actually very instrumental in having this standard incorporated into statute back in 2005. It says that any new waste storage facility or repair to a waste storage facility has to meet the NRCS standards or an equivalent design approved by the Agency of Agriculture. So if your pit is leaking and it has to be repaired, it has to meet the NRCS standards. So if NRCS approved it and it's still leaking, it still needs to be repaired to the NRCS standard.
Yeah.
So the next change in this, so right now, when there's an alleged groundwater contamination from a waste storage facility, the agency is required to go out and conduct the investigation. So if what they're changing here is the secretary suspects that a waste storage facility may be contaminating groundwater, the secretary pays the cost of any initial groundwater monitoring to determine whether a facility poses a threat to human health or the environment. Then 21 days after that determination that a facility poses a threat to human health or the environment because of an apparent violation of the groundwater standards, the secretary notifies the Department of Health and ANR of the location. So they're still doing the initial investigation. What may come of that initial investigation is not necessarily the agency's responsibility. It may be the farmer's responsibility to pay for the cleanup. So that and monitoring. So that is really kind of what is being changed here. The agency does that initial investigation to determine if the waste storage facility violated the state's groundwater protection standards. And then if in that case, the groundwater protection standard rule kicks in, ANR enforces, and the person that's responsible for the contamination of groundwater becomes responsible for cleanup.
Any questions on that section? No? No? I guess we're good to go.
Okay. So the next is the management of non-sewage waste. Part of the agency's authority over waste on farm. And what they want to change is, first of all, it's just a technical amendment on page 4, lines 21 to 22, changing shall to does. So sewage does not mean stormwater runoff. And that's consistent with existing stormwater statute. And then when a person is transporting or arranging for the transport of non-sewage waste to a farm for deposit in a manure pit or for use as an input in a methane digester, they need to obtain the approval from the secretary prior to transporting the non-sewage waste to the farm. Secretary may require a person to report to the secretary at a designated time. So this is, remember, Agency of Natural Resources used to regulate this stuff, but then they determined that because it was going into a manure pit and then being used as an agricultural input or going into a digester, that it wasn't a waste, that it was an input, an ingredient, etc. And so they stopped regulating it, but the Agency of Ag wants to regulate it. And that's what they're asking for, that ability to approve prior to the transfer of the non-sewage waste to the farm.
Is that, I mean, we've got a big one, a big digester, a new one down lower Addison County or in Addison County that's generating electricity for Middlebury College. And so they would have to get a permit from the Agency of Ag to truck any type of waste other than farm waste to the digester?
Well, right now they're required to report to the agency. That's the existing law. And so what the agency wants to do is to have some oversight and say yes or no. The agency is already involved with that digester. The agency just wants the ability to say when it's appropriate or not for the material or for the amount of the material, to actually give their oversight some teeth.
Because I know, I have a digester up, several of them up north here on big farms, and occasionally they take certain materials from downs in, sometimes not even in Vermont, and pick it up and put it in their digester, but they're already having to report that anyways.
Well, yes.
Yep.
And you can't just put anything in your manure pit or in your digester. So there are certain things that are allowed and not allowed.
Yeah. But when they had a flush of milk, it seemed like they were bringing product, taking whole milk down, bringing skim and sometimes even whole milk back if they didn't have silos, and putting it in pits. That must be an allowed product.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, any questions on that section? No? Okay, Michael?
So the next section relates to an existing statute which provides that the Agency of Ag is going to provide incentive grants for nutrient management planning. The agency does not provide these grants anymore. The grants for nutrient management planning are provided through UVM extension. The agency would just like to have this statute struck because they don't do it anymore.
Is that listed somewhere in some other law or
That
It must be.
UVM does?
Yeah.
No, it's not in statute to my knowledge. It's just a program that UVM extension runs.
and where do they get the authority to run it? I mean, if we had that in statute, there must be some reason for that.
Well, you have it in statute because it was added around the time when nutrient management plans became a requirement for all farms. And there was concern that because of their expense at the time, it was, between $5,000 to $8,000 for your initial plan, and then for updates after that. And it's probably much more expensive now. You wanted to give farmers some assistance. And so that was originally added in 2005, and it's been amended a couple of times since then, but it really hasn't been implemented by the agency for a few years.
Those nutrient management plans are very important, and it's very important that farmers follow them. And I just don't want to lose that aspect, that the importance of them.
Well, they are still required under both the RAP, under all ag water quality requirements, whether it's a large farm, medium farm, or small farm. You need to have a nutrient management plan and or site-specific management of your agronomic practices.
Well, I could see the agencies, somebody needed to update their nutrient management plans down the road, and they didn't do it. I could see possibly the agency coming back and saying, well, the legislature did away with us regulating nutrient management plans in 2022. So, it's not our fault.
You wouldn't be, this doesn't take away the agency's regulation of nutrient management plan. It takes away the grants for farms to develop their nutrient management plan. The agency still regulates nutrient management plans underneath the various different permits and certifications. That's not going away. It's just a grant authority.
And of course, they don't have any money to do grants with anyways, probably.
Well, they haven't been doing them for a few years. So it's probably, I would say it's definitely not in the agency's budget anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, they put it into labor. Hire one or two more people. Well, any questions on this section? Chris?
Well, just to be clear, this changes nothing. Those grants go out through extension, you're saying, Michael? So the grant still exists. The oversight still exists. We're just truing up. This is a house cleaning that sort of, I guess I've never quite understood why we worry about old language and statute, but that's what this is, right?
Yes. So UVM extension has a brochure on what you need to do for your nutrient management plan, the standards for it, and how you fund it. And it includes options like seeking an NRCS equip loan, going to the conservation districts, and then basically figuring out how you can do your own nutrient management plan based on a class. So there's options out there for farmers.
Thanks.
Should I move on?
Yeah,
Section 6 is the Capital Equipment Assistance Program. This is broadening the activities that may be eligible for assistance under the program. You can see in page 8, subsection A, that the purpose of the program is to assistance to purchase or use innovative equipment that's reduces surface water with ag waste, improves water quality, reduces odors, separates phosphorus, decreases greenhouse gas emissions, and reduces costs to farmers. But in subsection B, the existing subsection B, the money is really only there to improve manure application, separation of phosphorus, or nutrient management plan implementation. It doesn't reflect those other activities like decreasing greenhouse gas emissions or reducing odor. So the agency has asked that the program, the financial assistance, is available to any activity that achieves the purposes of the section, which is in subsection A.
yeah. So that would cover all these new things that might make us less pollutant.
Right, and it's actually something that's both in the task force, the dairy task force, the legislative dairy task force. They recommended this. It's also in the climate change action plan. They recommended this to make these funds more flexible and what they can be used for. And so that's what 4020, the change to 4828 would do.
Yeah, that would help the farmers get some electric tractors.
It could.
Yeah.
That's an innovative equipment that that's a possibility.
But it's amazing the equipment that these companies are making to, like manure injections, no-till seeders, and no, that's fine. Any questions from committee?
Nope.
No, we're good then, Michael.
All right, moving on to section 7. It's a similar change. The Farm Agronomic Practices Program has been around for over a decade, and it provides farms in Vermont with state financial assistance for implementation of soil-based practices. But then it lists out the specific soil-based practices that it would provide assistance for. And the agency has testified to you that some of these things just aren't being done. And that what they would like is more flexibility, that to specify the specific practices that meet the purposes of the section and that are eligible for assistance under the Farm Agronomic Practices Program. This is also basically within the climate action plan of loosening the eligibility requirements for some of the assistance for soil health and soil practices.
So,
that's
what's that list that they've got crossed out? Conservation, crop rotation.
So these are the practices that under current law can be funded. And the agency is saying that some of these just aren't done in Vermont and really shouldn't be a limitation on the use of these funds for soil-based practices. What they want is more discretion, which you'll see on page 10, line 12 through 15, in establishing those practices that meet the purpose of the section and rates and payment limits for any assistance available to farms under the grant program. So taking away these limitations, like you can only use it for cover cropping, or you could only use it for side dress, nitrate test, etc., and saying that they can approve practices that are for implementation of soil-based practices that improve soil quality and nutrient retention, increase crop production, minimize erosion potential, and reduce agricultural waste discharges. So that's the purpose of the section.
But
And there-
why wouldn't they just leave those practices? I don't know which ones they aren't doing anymore, but over the years, every one of those has been very heavily supported, like cover cropping, which is still very important. And I think we heard, we're up to a lot of acreage, cross slope tillage. Those things are all in no-till. We've been pushing that. Why wouldn't they have just added on to that list and a host of other items that could be recommended and implemented to increase our, I wonder why they struck all that and
Well,
just,
I think they think that the list is limiting, and they will continue to fund many of these practices that are being implemented, but because some are not being implemented anymore, they don't think they're relevant to be listed, and they just want general authority to establish the specific practices that meet the purposes of maintaining soil health and protecting water quality.
but it just seems funny that whenever these things were added, our former colleagues decided that they should be listed in the statute. And now we're willing to give up the legislature's point of view on listing certain options and giving all the authority to the agency to determine what's good or bad or in or out. And, too many times we give stuff away that 10 years later we think we shouldn't have given away. But any thought from any committee members on that?
Well, you could probably keep that listing of the practices from 1 through 6, but then could keep in the language that allows the secretary to establish other practices that meet the purposes of this section. I don't know.
That was my question, is why didn't they do it that way instead of the way they are doing it?
Yeah. I don't know the answer, but
Is
I see your
Steve on the call, Linda?
I think he is. He was. Yes, he's here.
Could we ask him that question?
Sure. Good morning, Senator Starr. How are you?
Good. Well, I guess.
Yeah, you seem like you might need another cup of coffee this morning.
Well, I wonder sometimes maybe the agency staff couldn't have used an extra cup when they were putting things together.
I always can.
No, I was wondering why those 5 items were stripped out or why they weren't left in, and then just add to that, giving the agency the authority to add any other innovative ideas that may come up.
So I think either way is fine. The idea is not to get rid of these practices that we obviously think are critical. It was just to create more flexibility. And if the list said including these practices, I think that would be fine. We just don't want to limit innovation, limit the ability to provide money. So I don't know that we have a specific preference, but the list, doesn't help us because we already provide these. If you think it's important to have the list in the statute for a point of reference, I think that's absolutely fine. We just want the flexibility to go beyond the list and to be able to adapt to the broader purposes as the practices change, and not necessarily have to get legislative changes every time there might be something new that warrants funding. But the intent was not to limit in any way the grants to the things that we know are important, like, as an example, cover cropping. So I think from our perspective, I believe either way would be fine.
Well, I just question whether we want to leave. I mean, if this is in statute, it must be some former legislative committee felt that these things were important to be listed, and as I said earlier, we give away our authority all the time, and then we wonder why. And I just felt that if they were listed, plus we added language that would give the secretary the authority or the agency authority to add any new innovative ideas to this in future years when they look this thing all up again, they would see, well, the legislature did put 5 things in the law, and the commissioners added these 3 or 4 more, and they would have a reason to look at this if the law was going to be changed in the future. But anyways, any comments from the committee?
I think you raise a good point, Mr. Chair. I'd like to see the 6 techniques left in. I also have a question on page 10, lines 13 and 14 and 15. Is that practice of establishing payment rates and payment limits being struck in the next 2 lines, and that's why it's listed above that? In other words, how is it determined at the moment how to establish payment rates and payment limits?
The agency has that authority right now.
Okay, so this doesn't change anything there.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any questions on that section we just heard back from Stephen on?
No,
So
Nope.
you want to leave it the way it is, or change that language? Michael change that language around.
I would favor leaving the 6 techniques in and redoing the language further down that just says, I don't have it in front of me, whatever the secretary can add other standards. If you keep scrolling, Michael. Yeah, right there. Yeah, shall establish specific practices that meet the purposes of this sec. Yeah, that part's okay. I
So
don't,
remove,
Steve said, I don't think it changes anything.
would that be agreeable by the committee?
I
Yes.
mean, as long as it's in a way that is one of those including
Yeah,
No.
styles, so that, I mean, I don't think we should have to change statute anytime we land on a better strategy to accomplish this goals. That's right. Mr. Chair, we seem to have taken on strange roles of me supporting the agency today and you pushing back, but I think this is an arena where we're learning a lot every couple of years, and so how we give the agency some flexibility, I'm open to, but if that's a list that isn't exclusive, then I think that's fine.
agreed.
Yeah. So if that's agreeable, I don't see anybody disagreeing. Could we make that change, Michael?
Sure, sure.
Okay,
The next section, section 8, it's really a technical amendment in the reference to the medium farm rules. There's an old reference to acceptable agricultural practices that was never changed to required. And so that's being requested to be changed. It's really a technical amendment.
Yep.
change from acceptable to the required.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And did I say that this was the medium farm? This is the large farm section. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the next section is new, not requested by the agency. It is extension of the task force to revitalize the Vermont dairy industry. Because the authorizing language for the task force would have the task force end on March 1st. The language notwithstands the fact that it will not continue to exist, and it shall retain the authority it was granted in that act, and then it reauthorizes the per diem appropriations for legislative members and for the other members.
Yep.
Yeah, is that with,
Yep, that looks good. Line 12, Michael, on page 11. You probably want to have it say shall continue to exist, not exists.
Yes, yeah, okay. That actually kind of tripped me up when I was reading through it. So.
But otherwise, I'm fine with it.
yeah, any questions on that? If not, we'll move on to I guess that should be about it.
Yeah.
Well, the only other change is changing the name to an act relating to agricultural water quality enforcement and dairy farming.
That's all done good. Yeah.
Bobby, what's the risk of this ending up in natural resources and them turning it into something we don't like?
You'd have to move for it to be committed to their. This is going to go to approves by rule because it's got the per diems in it.
Yeah.
Plus, it has all the other funding programs in it. So it's going to go. Secretary Bloomer, I'm almost 100% sure we'll send it to appropriations, but it's not required to go anywhere else. So it would, from appropriations, it would go to the Senate floor, and for it to go to natural resources, you would have to vote for it to go to natural resources.
Yeah, and there's no reason for it to go there.
Well, water quality, that immediately dings. Bray's going to want to look at it because he's going to just assume we're up to no good.
Well, you can look at it while it's going by his door to appropriation.
Well, sometimes I just worry opening that door.
It would take a motion, Senator Parent, is your point, and it's a valid concern. It would take a motion and a vote to do that, I would guess.
Right. But you guys, I usually lose motions and votes on the floor. You guys usually win. So I'm wondering if you've already had that discussion with the pro tem that this shouldn't have a stop there.
Well, I mean, he's got his hands full anyways, and I don't see any reason why we aren't changing. We're making water quality issues stronger, not weaker. And I don't see any reason. I'll talk to him, Chris. I think Chris already talked to them some on this, right, Chris? Did you talk to him on this one?
I feel like it wasn't this one. It was something else we were looking at, but I mean, I think Sarah Parent is right that there could be some concern, and then if you read the language, you see that this is, technically not changing anything. It's clarifying and cleaning up.
Yeah,
So.
and I wanted to I think, I wanted to get this to meet crossover stuff. And the house is doing the same thing with their stuff, so, you know, we'd be able to, this still gotta go all through the house, committee and,
Yeah.
but
It-
as far as approach, I think this last section, could be money spent. But any of the other sections, there's no additional ask, is there, Michael?
No, the other sections are already included in the governor's budget,
Yeah, so,
except for the nutrient management grant section, which is being struck. All the rest have money if they are money programs.
yeah. So, any further comments on?
Bobby, there's just a concern that flagged on the bedding issue. Can we just make sure we maybe potentially talk to the agency before we vote this out, and just, I think some permit issues, if you bring bedding from one farm to another, it's under one permit, and then if they sell it, it's not. So I just want to make sure if there's any confusion there, we have that ironed out.
Well, maybe Steve Collier's still on from the agency.
I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Corey had a question. And you want to ask your question,
Yeah,
Corey?
Steve, so just one of my farmers flagged for me, just considering bedding as ag waste, and if they brought it between farms, it files under one permit, just the way we're looking at it, versus if they bought it or brought it in or sold it, it wouldn't go into the one permit. So is there a way to maybe get a cleaner solution to that? Have you heard that concern?
Good morning, Senator Parent. I have not heard that concern, but is this in relation to the changing of the non-sewage waste language and
I
getting
think so,
permission
yeah.
first? I mean, I'll
Yeah,
just give you my opinion on that language. Is it doesn't change anything other than just make it clearer, because already we're allowed to have people report to us what they're putting in a manure pit or in a digester. The language isn't as express as we'd like, that we can require that reporting before it's dumped. So what we've asked for is just clarification that the report can be made before deposit, and that we have the ability to intervene and stop that if we think it's inappropriate. So I'm happy to find out more from Laura DePietro, our division director. I haven't heard this concern. The language that we're asking for, I don't think changes that analysis in any way, because we're already, I think our authority, because in the current subsection C, it already says that we can, after a report, so we're already allowed to get people to report to us. And then after that report, we can prohibit it. So to me, the power is already there and expressed, but just given the depackaging materials and some of our concerns about that, we just wanted it to be clearer that we can actually ask for the report up front. It's also not something that we necessarily have to do. It's just an authority that we can have. So right now we may require people to report to us. So I believe the way that water quality is doing it is, if it's something that's already known to be accepted, we're not necessarily requiring that report. I believe that what we want to do is, if it's something that we're concerned about, to get more information and make sure that we know before a farmer is potentially putting it in their pit and then spreading it on their field. So I'm happy to find out more if you want, Senator Parent, about the feed issue, but I don't actually think this language changes that dynamic anyway.
okay. I just want to make sure that, and that, like I said, was a concern, someone watching back home. So I just want to make sure we have that clarified before I'm willing to move on with it, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, Michael?
I would think that bedding is only going to become an issue if it's improperly managed and somehow becomes a water quality issue. Like if it's being somehow improperly land applied or directly discharged into a water, which is authority the agency has already. But if it's just coming onto the farm for use as bedding, sawdust, the material from a methane digester, etc. That's not waste necessarily. It's going to be an ag input, and if it's properly managed, it doesn't create any water quality issues, then I don't think you're going to have an issue.
Other questions on that, Corey, or?
Well, is there a way to clarify that bedding from those is not waste in legislation? I think that's the big thing. I know we don't view it as that, but do we need to be a little more explicit? Can we be more explicit about that in this?
So though, as I referenced earlier, this term is like used throughout the chapter, and it includes that you can't have a discharge of waste or agricultural waste to waters. I think I could probably add a section that says, or a sentence that says, I'd have to think about how I would do this.
Yeah,
Because
I'm
you
not
s-
asking for commitment to now, but I just, if there's some confusion out there already, like when it's being applied, is there a way just to make it clear? Or as
Right,
clear as possible?
because I think you still want to have it potentially in there if it's going to be discharged, right? Because you still don't want it discharged, but you want it to be imported for the purposes of for use as bedding. I think I have to think about that. I don't know how to do
Okay.
that easily.
Thank you.
So, Steve,
Yeah, thank you, Senator Starr. So I don't have the language right in front of me, but I think that the change only relates to material that's imported to a manure pit or to a digester. So if it's imported exclusively for bedding, I don't even think this language is triggered.
I think Steve's right. Ultimately, when the agency adopts rules for agricultural residuals, maybe that becomes an issue, but the agency hasn't done that yet. And so it's really kind of premature to say that that's going to be an issue. But for purposes of this bill, it's only for manure pits and methane digesters.
Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The difference I see, and I think it is a substantive difference, Steve, is that the person has to get approval prior to transporting it, whereas right now, they don't have to do that. They do have to file a report, and the secretary can step in after the fact. But this makes it before they transport it. Am I reading that correctly, the change?
Well, Senator Collmore, I think you're reading what we want to make clear. Absolutely right. The only reason I say I think we already have the implied authority to prohibit it before it's deposited, because the current language says we can require a report and we can also prohibit. Once after we receive a report, we can prohibit it. It doesn't talk about the timing of that though, which is why we're asking to clarify it, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to prohibit it after it's deposited. Now, if it's an ongoing relationship where it's being delivered every week, maybe it would, where the first deposit is made and then you prohibit the subsequent ones. But you're hitting exactly the point we're trying to make clear, is that we want the ability to find out what's going to be deposited before it is, so that if it's problematic, we can intervene and before it's too late. So that, yes, I don't think it really is a change, but I think it's a clarification that's warranted.
I appreciate the legal chat.
Me too, thanks.
Corey, the concern that you heard was exactly what?
I just think that they don't think it should be considered ag waste, the bedding, as Michael kind of pointed out, that it's an input. And so I think clarity there. I think they're also worried about the waste, especially if they're moving between farms. Does that put them under one permit? Whereas if it's a sale or a bought from another farm, it doesn't. So clarity there, but I told the individual to reach out to you, Bobby, and they're gonna reach out, I think, to try to talk you through it as well.
So I just searched chapter 215, which the definition of ag waste is used in. There's 33 definitions or 33 uses of ag waste, and there's 90 uses of waste, which was probably really means that there's 60 uses of waste and 30 uses of ag waste. And they almost all apply to the discharge or non-point source runoff of that waste to waters. So if you say that bedding isn't waste, well then, do you see my concern that if bedding were to run off into water, that would be a discharge?
Yeah.
And you can't actually do anything about that because that would be a discharge most likely under the Federal Clean Water Act. If it was through a point source, definitely. Even over non-point source, it probably would be, because it wouldn't be applied according to a nutrient management plan. So I just think that saying that it's not waste is complicating for the 90 other uses of the term. And so I need to think about how to do that appropriately.
But what about moving bedding from one farm to another? Say, if, you know, where the digester is, you get bedding off from that digester.
Right, but that's as Steve was referring, that's not actually regulated by the bedding that's taken away from a digester to another farm.
Is an input, right?
It's not being added to a methane digester, and it's not being added to a manure pit. So the agency's new authority doesn't relate to that. That's just going to be an agricultural input, just like taking sawdust would be an agricultural input that the agency doesn't regulate.
So Corey, did you talk to your people in regards to that issue?
I've asked for clarity, but I haven't talked to him right now. We're talking.
No,
So-
no,
But yeah, I asked him for some clarity on it and try to find a solution today or tomorrow morning on it.
yeah. Steve?
Thank you, Senator Starr. I was just going to say, Senator Perrin, if you get more clarity from your constituent, if you want to email me or call me with a question, I'll be happy to consult with Laura DePietro, our Water Quality Division Chief. I don't think this is an issue, and I'm quite confident the language that we're suggesting changing doesn't implicate it anyway. But I'm happy to, if there's a more specific situation, it might help, and I can probably get an answer for you pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or concerns with any parts that we've gone over this morning? Steve, I don't know if you were on earlier when we on section 1. I brought up several issues in regards to the authority to the good standing language. And I don't know how to get around this other than saying it the way it is. But you had a situation up in my district that one of your inspectors caused a great deal of grief with the situation. And, you know, it was, from my point of view, it could have been handled totally different. And I'm sure that if that person had applied for some grant, they wouldn't have been in good standing because of that situation. And, you know, it was totally caused by miscommunications and people getting all excited over nothing. And, you know, I really question whether giving you guys that broad authority to withhold funds from a situation like that is fair. But we haven't decided to dump it yet, but if it was left up to me, you guys wouldn't get that authority. And you would keep your personnel under tighter wraps on how to deal with individuals rather than just hound the individuals. But anyways.
May I offer something, Senator, or?
Sure.
Thank you. So I don't know what situation you're referring to, but I do understand that enforcement can be very difficult and it can be very challenging for the individuals. And I'm certain that as well as I think we do handle it almost all the time, I'm certain we're not always flawless about it. But why I think this good standing change is important is it for a few reasons. One is it just creates equity across all of our programs because it's already required for water quality. That's something that the legislature instituted years ago, and it's not required for other programs. And so to us, it just makes sense to have equity across the programs. And keeping in mind, the principle is simply, if you're going to receive state aid, then you should be following state law. And that's the principle, but we don't want it to be imposed in a way that's unfair to people. And honestly, there's nothing that prohibits us from doing that already. So part of this is just to increase transparency. Right now, if somebody applies for a grant and they are not in good standing, there's nothing that I'm aware of in any law that would stop us from considering that. But what we don't like is that that's not upfront and clear. I don't want us to be evaluating grants without the applicants knowing what it is that we're considering. So I would like applicants to know that, hey, if you want to apply for state aid, you are actually supposed to be complying with all of the state laws in your business. So that, you know, it's really to get that upfront transparency so people know. It's also a good carrot to get people to come into compliance. And in terms of enforcement itself, please just consider that no one is out of good standing until there's a litany of steps that are taken before that. So there's always outreach first. There's always at minimum a letter with a notice of violation. There's always an opportunity to discuss those violations. There's always a hearing if the constituent wants the hearing. And then it's only after that, after notice is given and a hearing is given and a finding is made, that there would actually be a final order against someone. And even then, the final order only comes into play if someone is out of compliance with it. Or if they appealed that final order to court, the court could have it in its discretion, the opportunity to stay that final order. So it's quite a process before a final order is actually into play. And if someone is actively contesting that final order, then it still may not be in effect in terms of barring the grant money. So we don't want to use, if this authority is given, we don't plan to use it cavalierly. We don't want to use it cavalierly, but as a principle, it seems to make sense that if you are willingly not complying with state laws, and this means not only not complying, but after being notified, you're not willing to do what's necessary to correct them, that maybe giving taxpayer funds to that farm is not the best use of the money. But again, we understand that there are degrees. We don't want a blanket ban because we think that could be unfair. Somebody could have a minor violation, although it'd be very unusual for a minor violation to get to a final order, because we have a lot of enforcement discretion at the front end to deal with that a lot less aggressively. So I'll never say that we do everything perfectly because no one ever does, but the principles behind this request, I think, are prudent for use of taxpayer funds. And if whenever we do something that's not justified, we're not the final say. A court is or can be. So there are checks on us. We just, and again, this is more about, in a lot of ways for us, transparency, because we can't, if someone's out of standing with us, we can deny a grant. We just want people to know that that's a possibility up front, and just to be aware that, hey, there's some reasons to work with us to try to make sure that we're staying, that everyone's staying on target. And sometimes people do need to push back against us, and we really try to be receptive to that. And I'm in calls all the time with people who write to the secretary who don't like how we've done something, and we really try to listen as much as we talk. Maybe not me, because
Are you sure about that? Well, anyways, are there any other questions, Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to follow up, Steve, on the chair's point, and I understand your side too, and I do. If someone, for instance, I'm not saying this has ever happened, had a farm stand that was 2 feet out of compliance in terms of its proximity to a road, would you view that as a minor situation?
Well, I mean, if it was 2 feet from the road and right next to it where the traffic was, then maybe not. But if it was just 2 feet out of a 50-foot setback, to me, that's not a big deal, Senator Collmore, but it's hard to assess without all the facts. Like if it was a safety risk, if the location of the farm stand posed some kind of a real risk, then that's always different than if it's a technical setback compliance. But on the other hand, if there's a 50-foot setback, probably somebody should have the 50-foot setback, but we can also give variances for that when appropriate. So, I hate to comment on hypotheticals without knowing all the facts, but yeah, if I'm looking at a grant application and someone is 2 feet off in a farm stand, without more, that wouldn't be enough for me to say this person doesn't deserve a state grant.
And I didn't mean to back you into the fence, Steve. I understand.
That's okay.
And again, a good answer.
Thanks.
Chris?
Yeah, I find myself agreeing with Steve on this. I mean, nobody's forced to take state grants. This is taxpayer money. If we don't like the rules that we are worried are tripping people up, we should change those, but and deal with it that way. But the principle, I mean, I find myself struggling to even present an argument against the principle that Steve's articulating. If you want a grant, you have to comply with the rest of, you can't pick and choose the parts of state government you like and ignore the things you don't like. This is what we kind of do, right? There's plenty of critique I would have about some of our rules, but if you want a grant, I don't think it's asking too much that you bring your operation into compliance. And as Steve said, they're already doing that. So this is just sort of a clarity. I don't know. To me, I'm pretty comfortable with this.
You've never had to deal with a lot of bureaucrats other than putting legislation together, but you should own a business for 50 years and I bet you we could have a different conversation in regards to all the rules and regulations.
Well, I have owned a business. It's not been an intensively regulated one. I have done work on buildings that put me at odds with bureaucrats. It drives me crazy. But the principle is, so fine, let's change those rules. Let's dig into those rules. They're the rules. You want taxpayer money.
But
that's the cost. I mean, so fine. You don't like the rules, don't apply for the grant. I just can't really get my way around that one.
You can't change the rules. At one point, I'd really rather not get into it, but at one point years ago, of course, I had a ton of trucks. And this one weekend, I mean, I even had the mechanics take the front wheels off to check the brake lines because they have shields and you can't see. And the brakes were not even half worn, the brake shoes. 3 days later, in Fairhaven, one of the inspectors for DMV inspected that very truck and put him right out of compliance. And so I called and said, well, I'm out of compliance. And well, what's the problem? My front brake shoes are bad. I said, well, golly, I just checked them this last weekend and they're super good. I drove to Fairhaven to change those lousy brake shoes that I never even put them on. I just pulled the brake drum off and showed the inspector. Can you see? Well, we had a big hoodoo over that because I wasn't going to let that just go. I mean, I drove 130 or 40 miles in one direction to resolve this. Well, it wasn't a rule that caused the problem. It was the inspector that caused the problem. And hell, he didn't get any penalty at all, but it cost me about $250, $300. How do you resolve that, Chris? You can't change the rule because the rule was fine. It was the person that was pushing the rule that caused the grief. And so it's all I'm saying to Steve is talk to your people. Tell them to use some common sense and most of this stuff, if it was a blatant misconduct of polluting the water or something like that, that's a whole different story. But a lot of these things are caused by the individual, not always the inspector, but even by the owner. But anyways,
and let's face it, enforcement changes from administration to administration. I remember under the last administration with workers' comp, they were enforcing it one way. And then this administration looks at it completely different. So we didn't need legislative change because they decided to look at it differently. So that changes. So to Senator Starr's point on some of this, I agree. I think, if we can.
Yeah. Well, anyways, we spent enough time on this. You've listened well. Anything else? So Michael, we need to do that one change by bringing that other language up further and putting it after the 6 items. And
Yeah.
I don't know, Corey, if you were satisfied with, I guess maybe
I'll check in for tomorrow.
And so I didn't know I'd like to get this bill out of committee tomorrow so we could get it down to approach for at least the end of the week, if not at the beginning of the week, we come back so we have time to get it through the process. There any other additions or deletions from members? See, tomorrow morning we've got reapportionment. Isn't it tomorrow morning at 7:30 to 8:30?
Yeah.
At 9 o'clock, we've got the livestock care standards. And
Yeah, it's a joint hearing.
yeah, and boy, we need to shave out a little time either before we go to that or in between that and the farm to plate thing to wrap this proposal up. So, Michael, what's your time look like tomorrow?
I have time between 9 and 9:30, but then I'm booked at 10 o'clock in House Natural, and then I'm booked in at 11 o'clock in Senate Judiciary on the right to farm.
What about 8:45?
I can do that.
Could you think we could get off? Will we go an hour on, or was Jeanette talking an hour and a half?
Hard to say.
Yeah, I don't know either. I'll check with her.
Well,
Either that or we just don't take a break at 10, Bobby. Although, Michael, you said you were done at 10, right?
Yeah, I got a House Natural meeting at 10.
Okay.
why don't we shoot for 8:45? And it shouldn't take us more than 15 minutes, I wouldn't think, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we just got
You're
that,
saying to approve this draft?
yeah, with the changes.
I guess, baked into here is your request that Senator Polina and I just drop the underlying bill altogether. And I didn't know if it was possible to have any conversation about that would maybe warrant more than 10 minutes. So is there any other time this week that I haven't looked closely at the agenda, but is there some reason we have to do it tomorrow?
Well, tomorrow is Wednesday, and then you go to the floor Thursday, and then,
And I just want to say tomorrow morning I have a medical appointment at 9 o'clock, so I wouldn't be able to be here 8:45 or 9:30, that kind of thing. You don't necessarily need my vote to move this bill out, I don't think, but I just want to make clear that I won't be in until later in the morning
yeah.
tomorrow.
Well, I guess Thursday. Well, the only thing we can do is wait until the end of tomorrow morning and see if we could catch it at that time. But boy, we got from 10:15 on, we got farm to plate, and usually there's quite a lot of discussion there. We could try it late tomorrow morning. Are you busy right up until noontime, Michael?
I am. I don't really know what Senator Sears intends for right to farm. But he likes council to be there.
Yeah, well, I don't blame him.
But we have a gap on Friday. Is that later than you want to go, or what?
I think that's pushing it right to the limit if we do
Well,
that.
The limit's March 8th or whatever, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, to get it over through the Senate and over to, well, it would only take a day to move it to approach. But then
Yeah,
you got to get.
It only has to be out of the committee of jurisdiction.
Pardon?
It only has to be out of the committee of jurisdiction, I think, by then.
Or it don't have to be passed by that
don't-
week?
I
No.
don't think so.
It could be in appropriations for a while.
Well,
Right, so I can read the rule to you, the crossover provision, if you would like.
Sure.
So all Senate House bills must be reported out of the last committee of reference, including the Committee on Appropriation and Finance and Ways and Means, except as provided below in sub 2, before Friday, March 11th, 2022. Any bill that's referred pursuant to Rule 31 to the Committees on Appropriations has to be out of that committee by Friday, March 18th.
oh, well, then we're okay. We'll do it Friday then. You know,
Okay.
we can move this back until Friday. That'll give Corey plenty of time to fool with his request and give Michael plenty of time to get the amendment done. So are we all set?
Yep.
Anything else, Steve, from you?
No, thank you for inviting me.
Well, we're always glad to see you. Just what you have to say sometimes it's questionable.
You imagine having to live with me myself?
Well,
Thanks.
very good. Thank you, Steve, for jumping on.
Sure, thank you.
Anything else for Michael committee? If
Nope.
not, thanks, Michael. So is there anything else that that committee has to bring up this morning?
All set.
Yeah.
The only thing is, Senator Starr, you'll see an email to you and I about S100 and testifying the House. So we can work on that offline, but one of us should go. I don't know if both of us could go. We're a compelling duo, but that would be strange for our remaining team here, because I think it's in the morning is the invite.
Is that our farm to school lunch thing?
Yes, S100, yes.
What time is it?
I don't know. I've just seen the email come in, but I think let's see. Yeah, either 11 or 2 on Thursday. So I guess it could be an afternoon interruption, but
Yeah. Well, we'll have to figure that out. It's crazy to find. It's awful about finding any free time. The way things are running. Our third committee requires quite a lot of attention.
yeah, I'm regretting that volunteer motion.
Do we get paid extra for that? Of course, I'm just joking. We're lucky we get paid for what we do, I guess. Well, if there isn't anything else, Corey, work with your crew on trying to get some straight issues there on the bedding, and if you get something, get it to Michael so he'll have it.
Yep, I will.
Yep. If there isn't anything else, guys, I guess we'll adjourn and have a little lunch and get ready for our next meeting. Some of us got a meeting at 12:10 or 15. So anyways, I think we're good to go.